The twin diesel engines beneath my feet growled like caged beasts as PT-109 cut through the Solomon Islands' darkness. Phosphorescent spray kissed my face while I gripped the wheel, watching the enemy destroyer's searchlight sweep the water just 200 yards to starboard. My heart hammered against my ribs. One slip of moonlight across our hull, one careless wake, and those 5-inch guns would turn us into splinters and blood. But tonight, October 6, 1943, we weren't the hunted. We were the hunters. The Japanese thought they owned these waters after dark. For months, their Tokyo Express runs had terrorized our positions on Guadalcanal, racing down from Rabaul to dump supplies and reinforcements before vanishing into the pre-dawn gloom. They called it the Rat Run, and until now, we'd been powerless to stop it. But that was before Admiral Halsey unleashed his pack of PT boats into the slot, 78 feet of plywood, mahogany, and pure American audacity, armed with 4 torpedo tubes and more firepower than most small destroyers. I was 24 years old that night, fresh out of the Naval Academy with 2 months of combat under my belt. The Navy had made me a lieutenant and given me command of 12 men and the fastest boat in the Pacific. What they hadn't prepared me for was the weight of those men's lives in my hands, or the way fear and adrenaline could make time stretch like taffy in the moments before battle. "Skipper," whispered Torpedoman First Class Murphy from his position at the tubes, "I've got a clear shot at that tin can. Range, 400 yards in closing." Through my binoculars, the Japanese destroyer looked enormous, a Fubuki-class killer bristling with guns and deadly intent. Her crew had no idea we were out here, ghosting through the chop at 28 knots with our muffled engines barely audible above the wind. Intelligence had told us to expect a convoy, 2 destroyers escorting a pair of fast cruisers loaded with supplies for the Japanese garrison on New Georgia. What they found instead was a formation of 6 warships, the largest Tokyo Express run we'd seen since the campaign began. "Hold your fire, Murph," I briefed into the voice tube. "We're going after bigger fish tonight." Beyond the destroyer, silhouetted against the star-drunk sky, loomed the bulk of a Sendai-class light cruiser. Even in the darkness, I could make out her distinctive pagoda superstructure and the wicked length of her main battery. 6-inch guns that could reach out and touch us at 10 miles, backed by enough armor to shrug off our machine gun fire like raindrops. But armor meant nothing if you couldn't see what was killing you. The plan was simple in the way that only the most dangerous plans can be. 6 PT boats spread across a 5-mile front, each with orders to penetrate the enemy formation and launch torpedoes at point-blank range. No radar, no radio chatter, just Mark XIII torpedoes, steady nerves, and the kind of desperate courage that comes from knowing your country needs you to do the impossible. I'd grown up in Iowa, about as far from the ocean as an American boy could get. My father had farmed corn and raised cattle, and the closest thing to naval warfare in my childhood was the toy battleships I'd floated in stock ponds during summer thunderstorms. But Pearl Harbor had changed everything. Like thousands of other young men across the heartland, I'd seen the newsreels of burning ships and dead sailors, and I'd known with crystalline certainty that my place was in the Pacific, hunting the bastards who'd sucker-punched us while we slept. The Naval Academy had taught me tactics and seamanship, but it was out here in the Solomons that I'd learned the real lessons of war. How to read the water in absolute darkness, feeling for the subtle changes in swell and chop that marked the passage of heavy ships. How to judge distance and bearing by the sound of engines, the way enemy searchlights swept their arcs, the barely visible wash of a destroyer's wake. Most importantly, how to push down the fear that tried to claw its way up from your belly every time the shooting started, and focus instead on the job at hand. "Contact bearing 090, called out Radarman 3rd Class Jenkins from his position behind the chart table. "Multiple bogeys. Looks like the whole Japanese Navy." Through the voice tube, I could hear my crew making their final preparations. Machinist Mate Rodriguez was nursing our temperamental engines, coaxing every possible knot of speed from machinery that had been running hard for weeks without proper overhaul. Gunner's Mate Thompson was checking the feeds on our twin 50 caliber machine guns, the ones that could put out 800 rounds per minute of armor-piercing death. In the forward torpedo room, Murphy and his striker were making last-minute adjustments to our fish, 2,000 pounds of Torpex explosive in each Mark XIII, enough to break the back of any ship in the Japanese fleet. The enemy formation was strung out across 3 miles of black water, moving southeast at 25 knots in a loose column formation. Lead destroyer, then the cruiser, then another cruiser, with 2 more destroyers bringing up the rear. A 6th ship, probably another destroyer, was running a parallel course about a mile to the northeast, obviously serving as a picket. It was a textbook Tokyo Express formation, designed to deliver maximum firepower against any surface threat while maintaining the speed necessary to complete their mission and escape before daylight brought American aircraft from Henderson Field. What they hadn't counted on was a pack of PT boats willing to charge straight into the teeth of their formation. "All ahead flank," I ordered, pushing our twin Packard engines to their limits. The boat leaped forward like a startled horse, her bow lifting clear of the water as we accelerated past 30 knots. Behind us, a rooster tail of phosphorescent spray marked our passage like a comet's tail. But we were committed now. Stealth was less important than speed. We needed to close the range before the enemy could react. The first destroyer grew larger in my binoculars with each passing second. I could see details now: the angular lines of her superstructure, the dark slots of her torpedo tubes, the small figures of her crew moving along her weather decks. She was beautiful in the way that all warships are beautiful, a perfect marriage of form and function, built for the sole purpose of dealing death to her enemies. In a few minutes, we were going to try to sink her. "Torpedo room, stand by," I called into the voice tube. "Standing by, skipper," Murphy replied. I could hear the tension in his voice, but also the steady confidence of a man who'd done this before. Murphy was a 20-year veteran who'd served on everything from battleships to submarines before volunteering for PT duty. He'd already sunk 2 Japanese destroyers and a transport in previous actions, and his expertise with the Mark XIII torpedo had earned him a Navy Cross and the unofficial title of Best Fish Shooter in the squadron. At 300 yards, the destroyer's lookouts finally spotted us. Searchlights blazed to life, sweeping the water like the fingers of an angry god. Klaxons wailed across the night as the Japanese crew scrambled to battle stations. Her main battery, 5 5-inch guns in single mounts, began to swing toward our position, but we were too close and moving too fast for effective fire control. "Fire one!" I shouted. The first torpedo leaped from its tube with a compressed air hiss, hitting the water with a splash that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that followed. The Mark XIII's wake was visible for just an instant, a thin line of bubbles racing toward the destroyer's starboard side at 46 knots. "Fire two!" The second torpedo followed immediately, aimed at a slightly different point on the enemy ship's hull to account for her defensive maneuvering. Both fish were running hot, straight, and normal, textbook shots that should have been guaranteed kills against such a large target at such close range. But the Mark XIII torpedo had problems. Everyone in the fleet knew it, from the greenest ensign to Admiral Nimitz himself. The magnetic exploders were unreliable. The contact exploders were worse. We'd had fish run under their targets without exploding, fish that hit dead center and bounced off like rubber balls, fish that exploded prematurely or ran in circles. It was the most frustrating weapon in the American arsenal, and yet it was all we had. The Japanese destroyer captain was no fool. The moment he spotted our torpedo wakes, he threw his ship into a hard turn to starboard, his engines screaming as he tried to comb the tracks. It was a good maneuver, exactly what the tactical manuals recommended, but he was turning into our second fish instead of away from it. The explosion came exactly 47 seconds after launch. A tower of white water erupted from the destroyer's starboard side, followed by the deep, gut-shaking rumble of 2,000 pounds of torpex detonating against 12 millimeters of steel plate. The ship lurched to port, her forward momentum carrying her into a skidding turn as her engine room flooded, and her power failed. "Direct hit," screamed Jenkins, his voice barely audible over the cheering of the crew. "She's listing hard to starboard." But we didn't have time to celebrate. The destroyer sisters were already responding to the attack, their searchlights converging on our position as their main batteries opened fire. 5-inch shells began falling around us, throwing up geysers of spray that drenched our deck and superstructure. We were fast and maneuverable, but we were also made of plywood and gasoline. One direct hit would vaporize us. "Hard left rudder," I shouted, throwing the boat into a tight turn that pressed us all against the starboard bulkhead. "All ahead flank." We raced away from the sinking destroyer at 35 knots, weaving through the shell splashes like a broken-field runner dodging tacklers. Behind us, the Fubuki-class ship was settling by the bow, her forward magazines probably flooded, her crew struggling to launch lifeboats in the darkness. In 5 minutes, she would be gone, another victim of American torpedo attack. But the night was far from over. The lead cruiser had turned toward us, her 6-inch guns already speaking in tongues of flame. These were serious weapons, guns that could punch through the armor of an enemy cruiser at 15,000 yards, commanded by fire control systems that were among the best in the world. Against a PT boat, they were massive overkill, but overkill was still kill. "Skipper," called Murphy from the torpedo room, "I've got 2 fish left and a clean shot at that cruiser. Range 800 yards and opening." I hesitated for just a moment. The cruiser was moving away from us now, opening the range with each passing second. In another minute, she'd be outside the effective range of our remaining torpedoes. But she was also drawing us away from the rest of the enemy formation, and our primary mission was to disrupt the entire convoy, not just sink one ship. The decision was made for me by the sudden appearance of star shells overhead. The Japanese were illuminating the entire area with parachute flares, turning night into a harsh, artificial day that painted everything in stark blacks and whites. Our camouflage was useless now. We stood out against the dark water like a neon sign. "Fire 3, I ordered. "Fire 4. Both remaining torpedoes leaped from their tubes simultaneously, their compressed air launches masked by the sound of shell splashes all around us. I watched their wakes racing toward the cruiser's port side, perfectly aimed for her engine room. If both fish hit, they would break her keel and send her to the bottom in minutes. The cruiser captain saw them coming. His ship heeled over in a desperate turn to port, her screws cavitating as he called for emergency power. It was a race now, 800 pounds of Torpex against 10,000 tons of steel, and the skill of a veteran Japanese naval officer. The first torpedo missed by 50 yards, running ahead of the cruiser's bow as she completed her evasive turn. But the second fish caught her amidships, right where her forward engine room met her after magazine spaces. The explosion was tremendous, a pillar of fire that climbed 500 feet into the night sky, followed by a series of secondary detonations as her ammunition cooked off. The Sendai-class cruiser broke in half. Her forward section rolled over immediately, taking 250 men down with it. Her stern section remained afloat for almost 10 minutes, long enough for some of her crew to abandon ship, but not long enough for any organized rescue effort. When she finally went down, she took another 100 sailors with her, good men who'd been doing their duty to their emperor, but who'd made the mistake of running into American torpedoes in the middle of the night, whispered Jenkins, staring at the burning oil slick that marked the cruiser's grave. Did we really do that? We had. A 78-foot plywood boat with a crew of 13 had just sunk a 10,000-ton cruiser with a complement of 600 men. It was the kind of victory that would have been impossible in any previous war. But these were new times, and we were fighting with new weapons according to new rules. The rules said that small, fast, expendable units could penetrate enemy formations and strike at their most valuable targets. The rules said that surprise and audacity could overcome superior firepower and armor protection. Most importantly, the rules said that American fighting men, properly trained and equipped, could take on any enemy in the world and win. But the Japanese still had 4 ships left, and they were very, very angry. The remaining cruiser had turned back toward us, supported by her 2 escorting destroyers. All 3 ships were firing now, their guns throwing up a curtain of steel and high explosive that turned the water around us into a chaos of shell splashes and flying shrapnel. We couldn't stay in this area much longer, not without torpedoes, not against those odds. "Smoke screen," I ordered. Thompson triggered our smoke generator, and thick white chemical smoke began pouring from our stern. In 30 seconds, we'd be hidden behind an artificial cloud that would mask our movements and confuse enemy fire control. It was an old trick, but it worked, especially at night, when visual contact was already difficult. But as we raced away behind our smoke screen, I could see other PT boats closing in on the Japanese formation. Lieutenant Commander Barnes in PT-103 was making a high-speed run on the second cruiser, while Lieutenant Morrison in PT-117 was positioning himself for a torpedo attack on one of the remaining destroyers. This was how PT boat tactics were supposed to work, multiple units attacking from different directions, overwhelming the enemy's ability to respond effectively. Barnes got there first. I watched through my binoculars as his boat charged straight at the cruiser's starboard side, ignoring the storm of gunfire that erupted from her secondary batteries. At 400 yards, he fired both of his forward torpedoes in a perfect spread, then threw his boat into a radical turn that nearly capsized her as he ran for safety. One torpedo missed. The other caught the cruiser square in her forward magazine. The explosion was visible from 20 miles away, a brilliant flash that lit up the entire horizon, followed by a shock wave that we could feel through the water even at our distance. When the light faded and our night vision returned, there was nothing left of the cruiser but floating debris and a few scattered lifeboats. 600 more Japanese sailors had just learned the hard way about American torpedo tactics. Morrison was having problems with the destroyer. His first attack had been spoiled when the enemy ship spotted his torpedo wakes and managed to comb them successfully. Now he was trying to set up for another run, but the destroyer was wise to him. She was zigging and zagging unpredictably, using her superior speed to stay outside effective torpedo range while her main battery tried to bracket the American boat with 5-inch shells. It was a classic duel between big guns and small boats, the kind of action that PT crews lived for. The destroyer had all the advantages of armor, firepower, and range, but the PT boat had speed, maneuverability, and the tactical initiative. In the end, it would come down to crew skill and a little bit of luck. Morrison got his luck when the destroyer's captain made a mistake. Eager to close the range and finish off the annoying American boat, the Japanese officer ordered a course change that brought his ship directly into Morrison's torpedo envelope. It was only for a few seconds, but a few seconds was all Morrison needed. "Got him!" I heard Morrison's voice over the radio, his excitement cutting through the static. 2 fish running hot and true. The destroyer tried to turn away, but she was too close and moving too fast. Both torpedoes hit her port side within seconds of each other, the twin explosions lifting her entire bow section clear of the water before dropping it back down in a twisted mass of steel plating and broken machinery. She went down in less than 4 minutes, her crew barely having time to launch a single lifeboat before she slipped beneath the black water. That left 1 destroyer and the picket ship, 2 enemy vessels against 6 PT boats. The odds had shifted dramatically in our favor, but the Japanese weren't giving up. Both ships were racing toward us at flank speed, their guns firing continuously as they tried to close the range for decisive surface action. It was time to finish this. "All boats, this is lead," I called over the radio, using the tactical frequency that connected all the PT boats in our squadron. "Form up for coordinated attack. We're going to swamp them with fish." The response was immediate. 6 PT boats converged on the remaining Japanese ships from 4 different directions, our diesel engines growling like a pack of hunting wolves. Each boat carried 4 torpedoes, 24 fish total against 2 targets. Even accounting for the notorious unreliability of the Mark XIII, we should be able to guarantee kills on both enemy ships. The final destroyer captain knew he was doomed, but he went down fighting. His ship was blazing away with everything she had: main battery, secondary guns, anti-aircraft weapons, even small arms from her crew. Tracers lit up the night like deadly fireworks as 5-inch shells threw up geysers of spray all around the attacking PT boats. Lieutenant Hayes in PT-124 took a direct hit from a 5-inch shell that turned his boat into kindling and gasoline vapor. 12 good men died in that explosion, their sacrifice another reminder of the price we paid for victory in these waters. But their deaths weren't in vain. Hayes had managed to fire his torpedoes before the shell hit, and both fish were running straight and true toward their target. The destroyer took 3 torpedo hits almost simultaneously, Hayes's 2 fish and 1 from Lieutenant Collins in PT-109. The triple explosion broke her back and sent her to the bottom in less than 2 minutes, taking most of her crew with her. There was no time for organized abandonment, no chance for heroic last stands. Just the sudden, shocking violence of modern naval warfare. The picket ship tried to run, but she was surrounded. PT boats were faster than any destroyer ever built, and we could maintain our top speed longer thanks to our lighter displacement and more efficient hull design. Within 10 minutes, we had her boxed in with no escape route. She fought to the end, her crew serving their guns with the kind of disciplined courage that earned respect even from their enemies. But courage wasn't enough against overwhelming firepower and superior tactics. 6 PT boats launched 24 torpedoes at her from point-blank range. 18 missed or malfunctioned, but 6 found their target. The final destroyer died hard, her magazines exploding in a series of brilliant flashes that turned night into day for several seconds. When the light faded and the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but burning oil on the water and the distant sound of men crying for help in a language we didn't understand. The entire action had lasted less than 40 minutes. 6 Japanese warships, 2 cruisers, and 4 destroyers had been sunk with the loss of over 2,000 enemy sailors. American losses were 1 PT boat and 12 men. It was the kind of victory that would have been impossible with conventional tactics, but PT boats weren't conventional weapons. As we formed up for the return journey to our base at Tulagi, I found myself thinking about those Japanese sailors floating in the darkness behind us. Most of them were already dead, victims of hypothermia, shock, and the simple inability of human beings to survive long in tropical waters at night. A few might make it to one of the small islands scattered throughout the Solomons, but most would simply disappear into the vast Pacific, their families never knowing exactly how or where they died. It wasn't something I particularly wanted to think about, but it was impossible to ignore. War had a way of forcing you to confront the reality of what you were doing, not just the tactical aspects of sinking ships and killing enemies, but the human cost of victory. Every torpedo hit represented dozens of dead men, sailors who'd left families behind in Japan, and who would never see home again. But that was the nature of the war we were fighting. The Japanese had started it with their sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,000 American servicemen while their diplomats were still talking peace in Washington. They'd followed up with brutal campaigns across the Pacific, murdering prisoners, torturing civilians, and fighting with a fanaticism that left no room for mercy or compromise. We hadn't asked for this war, but we were going to finish it. And if that meant sinking Japanese ships in the middle of the night, so be it. Every enemy vessel we sent to the bottom was one less ship carrying supplies to Japanese garrisons, one less threat to American Marines fighting for their lives on jungle islands, one less obstacle between us and final victory. The trip back to Tulagi took 2 hours through waters that had been transformed from a Japanese highway into an American hunting ground. Intelligence would later confirm that our attack had completely disrupted the Tokyo Express schedule for the next 3 weeks, forcing the Japanese to abandon their plans for reinforcing New Georgia and giving our forces on Guadalcanal a crucial breathing space. More importantly, we'd proven that American small craft could take on the Japanese Navy's best ships and win. The psychological impact of the victory was enormous, both on our side and theirs. American morale, which had been sagging after months of grinding jungle warfare, soared. Japanese confidence, which had seemed unshakable since Pearl Harbor, took a serious hit. But the real significance of that night wouldn't become clear until years later, when historians began analyzing the broader patterns of the Pacific War. What we'd done in the Solomons was demonstrate a new kind of naval warfare, one based on speed, stealth, and surprise rather than armor and big guns. PT boats were just the beginning. Later in the war, American submarines would use similar tactics to devastate Japanese shipping, while carrier-based aircraft would prove that small, fast platforms could deliver decisive strikes against the largest enemy ships. The age of the battleship was ending, and we were there to see it happen. When we finally tied up at our dock in Tulagi, the adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow. My hands were shaking as I shut down the engines, and I had to sit down for a moment to collect myself. It was always like this after action, the sudden realization that you'd been just seconds away from death, that a slightly different course heading or a more alert Japanese lookout could have sent you and your crew to the bottom instead of the enemy. But we'd made it. 13 men had gone out into the darkness aboard PT-109, and 13 men had come home. In a war where survival was never guaranteed and good luck was more valuable than good planning, that was something to be grateful for. My crew was already talking about the action in the animated way that sailors always do after a successful engagement. Murphy was explaining torpedo tactics to the younger men, using his hands to demonstrate proper firing angles and lead calculations. Thompson was cleaning his machine guns, a ritual he performed religiously after every patrol. Rodriguez was checking our engines for battle damage, making notes about maintenance requirements that would keep us operational for the next mission. They were good men, the kind of Americans who'd volunteered to serve their country in its hour of need, leaving behind families and careers and peaceful lives to fight a war that had to be won. Most of them were barely old enough to vote, but they'd already proven themselves in combat against one of the most experienced navies in the world. They were the reason we were winning this war, and the reason we would continue to win it. Over the next 18 months, PT boats would sink over 300 Japanese vessels in the Solomons alone, destroyers, cruisers, transports, supply barges, and submarines. We'd rescue downed airmen, conduct reconnaissance missions, land special operations forces, and generally make life miserable for the enemy in every way possible. Some boats would be lost, and some crews wouldn't make it home, but the majority of us would survive to see VJ Day and the final surrender of Japan. But that was still in the future. On that October night in 1943, all that mattered was that we'd struck a blow against the enemy and lived to tell about it. In the morning, intelligence officers would debrief us, mechanics would service our boats, and ordnance specialists would reload our torpedo tubes. Within 48 hours, we'd be back out there, hunting for more Japanese ships to sink. It was what we trained for, what we'd volunteered for, and what our country needed us to do. The Pacific was a big ocean, and there were still a lot of enemy ships out there waiting to be sunk. But after tonight, I was confident that we could handle whatever the Japanese threw at us. American ingenuity, American courage, and American torpedoes had proven themselves against the best the enemy could offer. The tide of war was turning in our favor, and PT boats were leading the charge. In the darkness of the Solomon Islands, plywood and mahogany had triumphed over steel and tradition, proving once again that in war, as in life, it's not the size of the dog in the fight that matters. It's the size of the fight in the dog. And American fighting men had plenty of fight left in them.